As far back as there have been motor vehicles, there has been motor racing. The love affair with speed and finding out which car and driver are the fastest is one that has only grown more over the past century, even to the point of dedicating documentaries on these sporting events and their legendary drivers. MFP presents 10 must-see motor racing documentaries.
Steve McQueen riding here still rides an occasional desert race, although he prefers motocross now.
One of the earliest, if not the first documentary focusing on motocross racing, On Any Sunday was released in 1971 and was financed by the king of cool himself, Steve McQueen. Showcasing his interest in racing, On Any Sunday shows off McQueen's obsession with motorbikes and his involvement with the motocross scene, which had not been as well known to the public before this documentary helped to better highlight it. Though not a huge presence in the doc itself, Steve McQueen brought enough credibility into motorcycle racing that Sunday has been credited as helping launch the craze that has gone on to explode over the last few decades. This would be further explored with other follow-up motorcycle media, such as the hugely popular Krusty Demon series. Never shying away from an opportunity to show off his interest in motorbikes, as he once before made sure to include it in the 1963 classic The Great Escape, Steve McQueen would go on to ride a red with the yellow trim 1970 Husqvarna 400 Cross with a 40 horsepower 2-stroke engine in Sunday. McQueen's image on the bike would go on to feature on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and was able to draw the attention he wanted, where even follow-up sequels over the passing years had been made due to the documentary's succession. Though of its time and dated based on its style and narration, On Any Sunday does feature some great slow-motion footage, along with an inside look into a sport which few at the time, as well as today, understood the appeal to such an endurance style of race of grit, sweat and mud all rolled into one.
Two things have remained constant: my mates and my beast.
An Australian-based documentary, Love the Beast focuses more on the obsession and love someone may have for a car they have owned and cherished for years. In this case, it is that of A-list movie star Eric Bana and his 1974 Ford Falcon XB Coupe, which he has had in his possession since he was 16 years old. Produced by Bana himself, Love the Beast tells the story of his Australian two-door Ford Falcon, made famous thanks to the Mad Max film franchise. The documentary explains the actor's passion of motor racing, which he is now an avid competitor of, along with his history with his mates in the car. Within the height of the Australian muscle car era, first released in 1973, the Ford Falcon XB came out in a number of different styles and trims, from utes to panel vans, station wagons, sedans, and the Bathurst popular two-door coupe, which could have been bought in the GT package option with a 351 Cleveland V8 engine, ranging between 300 and 350 horsepower. Interviewing a number of well-known TV presenters and car enthusiasts such as Jay Leno and Jeremy Clarkson, Love the Beast discusses the obsession some people have over their cars, and racing them to the point of even destroying them and themselves in the process. Batten allows the audience to see the modification of his pride and joy and how he had altered over the years to compete in Australian racing events, along with a disastrous crash while taking part in the Targa Tasmania rally that left the car in an almost unrestorable condition. The documentary is ultimately one about friendship and bonding, and the passion some people have of a sport and vehicle that can be at times difficult for even the most avid fan to explain to those who may not fully understand the attraction to either obsession.
Well, that's the end of our race.
A unique form of motor racing that is a free-for-all to partake, Dust to Glory is a 2005 documentary that centers around the Baja 1000 off-road racing event. A Mexico-based race held yearly across the Baja California Peninsula, which began in 1967. The Baja 1000 was founded by Ed Perlman and Don Francisco and has been going on strong ever since. Each year, racers from around the world travel to compete in this one-of-a-kind motor event where dirt bikes, 3 to 4-wheelers, dune buggies, and anything with wheels that can get you across the rugged 1,000-mile Mexican terrain in 32 hours is used. One of the more unique aspects of the race is that there is no one set track or path to take outside of a general course direction, as 1,200 participants compete in the event each year and drawing in over 200,000 spectators, none of which pay admission to watch, as it is an open event where the thrill of the adventure and danger is what attracts those interested. Directed and narrated by filmmaker Dana Brown, Dust to Glory tells of a racing event where almost anyone can take part in, and is one of pure endurance and willingness to go out into the unexpected, where the dangers of hitting native wildlife or even falling off the side of a rocky mountain is possible. With interchangeable races in teams, there are also those who take on the race solo and push their abilities to their limit, as one of the biggest fears is being lost in the middle of nowhere, also at night, with no real certainty of being rescued or found if something wrong was to happen while racing. Going through the history of the Baja 1000, Dust to Glory is on a lesser budget than most of the documentaries on this list, and yet its informative nature, along with discussing some of the famous names of those who have taken part in the event over the years, such as Steve McQueen, James Garner, along with interviews of the competitors, allows for a look into an event that plays more as a race of enjoyment for those taking part, as opposed to one of politics and massive prize rewards. With an array of some colourful competitors and a number of crazy vehicles taking part, this is one of only a few major racing events showcased where the experience is seen as more rewarding to most than victory itself.
The only way that you're ever going to win a race is just to be right on the edge of it all the time.
Winning, The Racing Life of Paul Newman was another Hollywood legend with a passion for motorsports documentary that delved into the life of an actor with an obsession for racing, perhaps greater than any other actor that came before and after him. Unlike his acting rival Steve McQueen, Paul Newman took his racing career that little bit further, as he was heavily involved in motorsports to the point of even starting his own team and getting other actors involved into the passion, such as his Color of Money co-star Tom Cruise, who after racing with, inspired him to go make his own racing movie Days of Thunder. Using the name borrowed from the 1968 IndyCar racing film starring Newman, the documentary showcases just how obsessive with racing he had become once he had gotten a taste for the sport at the midway point of his acting career. Finding the sport in his late 40s when most athletes' careers were coming to an end, Newman took on the challenge and grew strength in racing with each passing year. Newman would then join the Bob Sharp racing team, to which he would drive a number of vehicles within the Sports Car Club of America road racing event. Though mostly driving under the Datsun Nissan brand and the occasional Porsche 935 which he took second place at Le Mans in 1979, one car in particular which Newman drove that stood out was a 79 Datsun 280ZX V8 twin turbo with 933 brake horsepower, which was one of only 3 prototypes ever built. One of the issues faced early in Newman's entry into the motor racing world was an animosity towards an established, known actor deciding to take on the sport and being seen as a type of show pony and not considered the real deal. Though surprisingly, despite his age, even into his 50s, Newman showed his determination and allowed his grit to take over and made a name for himself and would go on to win a number of the events he would compete in. With interviews from racers such as Sebastian Bourdais, William T. Ribbs, and legends Bob Bondurant and Mario Andretti among others, the documentary shows a respect towards Newman and a better understanding of a man who, despite a lavish career in Hollywood, found his heart in motor racing.
The money Ford spent in racing for Le Mans was the biggest amount of money ever.
Arriving only a few years before the 2019 Hollywood movie inspired by the same story, the 24-Hour War tells of the involvement of Ford and Ferrari in the Le Mans 24-hour motor race and the build-up to the 1966 victory for Ford America. A documentary that begins with insight into both the creations of the Ford and Ferrari motor companies by detailing the history of its founders Henry Ford and Enzo Ferrari. The 24-Hour War includes interviews of family members, technicians of the past and historians, along with race drivers such as David Hobbs and Dan Gurney, as they recall and convey what had taken place and just how important it was to win the prestigious event. Highlighting a number of the many tragedies that took place at Le Mans over its many years of competition, the documentary also discusses one of the greatest tragedies in motor racing history, where on June 11, 1955, racer Pierre Levay crashed his Mercedes-Benz 300 SLR, causing the debris of his vehicle to fly out into the crowd, leading to the deaths of 84 people as a result and injuring over 100. It is in these moments we are reminded as viewers just how dangerous the sport of motor racing can actually be, and just how small of a margin of error is allowed and how quickly the sport can turn deadly. Though a number of race cars that took part at Le Mans are discussed, it is the Ford GT40 that takes center stage. Produced from 1964 to 1969, it was the GT40 Mark II that won Le Mans in '66, with its chief competition being the Ferrari 330 P3 with a V12 4-litre that produced 420 horsepower and a top speed of 310 km per hour, against the Ford's 427 big block V8 485 horsepower engine and its 212 miles per hour max speed. Lacking some of the excitement a number of the other docs on this list may have, the 24-Hour War is worthy of its mention as it chronicles a turning point in automotive engineering and allows for a better understanding of why so much time and money goes into motor racing in general.
When we become flippant, we say that in the 60s and 70s, motor racing was dangerous and sex was safe.
Filmed at the Monaco Grand Prix in 1971, Weekend of a Champion chronicles 3 days in the life of Formula One great Sir Jackie Stewart. Weekend of a Champion is an of-the-time documentary of the events that took place during the height of Stewart's popularity and when the sport was still at its most dangerous. With very little setup and narration outside of voiceovers by Stewart being interviewed, the audience is given a fly-on-the-wall experience as the camera follows the racer around as he prepares for his participation in the race. We are also given an onboard look at his drive as Stewart rips through the streets of Monte Carlo before claiming his victory. Being unscripted, and with no music or any visual effects added to allow for a home video style of filmmaking, Stewart is shown in Champion as the professional he was always known for being. His level-headed persona, along with his detailed explanation of events and his thoughts, make for an incredible look into a race driver who never seemed to show any sign of fear or excitement, as his demeanour seemed always in focus before and during a race. Shown driving his famous 1971 Tyrrell 003 with a 3-litre 90-degree mounted Ford Cosworth V8 engine with 460 brake horsepower, which Stewart had won 8 Grand Prix in, the car was capable of an average speed of around 150.754 miles per hour, a record set at the 1971 Italian Grand Prix that would not be broken until 2003. Released in 2013, the documentary plays out as 2/3 of the footage is shown as was shot in 1971, while the final act shares a present-time discussion with Stewart, reflecting on his career and those who he had seen die during a time where he himself was incredibly lucky to have come out unharmed. Weekend of a Champion plays out as a window into the past and documents a time in Formula 1 racing where the excitement and the danger was at its peak. Listening to Stewart himself give detail about those times sets the documentary as an almost one-on-one experience that makes for incredible insight into a time in racing that will never be seen again.
There was a lot more to Brock. You could see the hunger, the naked ambition to be number one.
One of the more recent documentaries on this list, Brock Over the Top chronicles the life and death of one of the closest things to royalty Australia's ever had when it comes to motor racing. Emerging from an era in the motorsports that was at one of its most competitive in the Australian Touring Car Championship of the 1970s, famed race driver Peter Brock had left a mark on the sport with his aggression and pure talent behind the wheel, winning back-to-back victories at Bathurst and Sandown. Brock had become the face of Holden Australia, as his winning streak was growing well into the 80s. He had driven and made famous the Holden Commodore VK, the Tirana XU1, and the legendary 1977 A9X hatchback Tirana with a 308 cubic inch 5-litre V8, producing 236 horsepower and a top speed of 214 km per hour, which Brock had won Bathurst 6 laps ahead of the competition and breaking the lap record in. These cars now fetch a large price due to their affiliation with Bathurst and Sandown, and Brock himself, as the A9X can now sell it to $1 million Australian, while the 2-time Bathurst winning HDT VH Commodore, driven by Brock, would sell at auction in 2018 for $2.1 million. Not without his own controversies, the documentary delves deep into Brock's personality both on and off the racetrack, and even his difficulties in his married life, and how he could often be seen as someone whose high demands made him a hard person to know. His face had become one of the most recognisable in Australia during his time, and on September 8, 2006, as a result of an accident while racing, he sadly died at the age of 61, leaving behind a legacy in racing and a record of 48 wins that still is compared to by professionals even to this day, and he is still remembered as the King of the Mountain. Known by different names, One by One, The Quick and the Dead, and Champions Forever, this 1975 classic Formula 1 documentary pulls no punches as it focuses on the extreme danger of one of the fastest and at the time deadliest motorsports in the world. Before being cut from future prints, the tragic deaths of racer Tom Price and German volunteer safety marshal Friedrich Janssen van Fern was shown as the opening intro, where the 19-year-old marshal ran across the track to give assistance to another vehicle before being struck by Price, killing both men in the collision. It is from there on we are shown an inside look into F1 racing of the early 70s as presented and narrated by actor Stacey Keach. Focusing on the attraction of the sport during a time where death was almost too common, one of the most shocking moments seen is the crash of British driver Roger Williamson in the 1973 Dutch Grand Prix, where in a desperate attempt, fellow Brit driver David Purley is seen abandoning the race trying to put out the burning wreck of Williamson's drive. Putting himself at risk and even trying to flip the car over several times to get his fellow driver out, Purley was unfortunately unable to help as the flames were uncontrollable, and he is seen devastated after attempts to try to save Williamson proved in vain. Along with highlighting the danger, so too is the sex appeal, the exotic locations, and an array of well-shot and documented racing events. One of the documentary's standouts is its of-the-time funk rock soundtrack by Japanese composer Tomoya Mashita, which plays throughout and matches the tone and feel perfectly, given the experimental style of editing used. With interviews from the likes of legends Jackie Stewart among others, it is in this documentary that several of the racers shown were eventually killed soon after being interviewed and before the footage was released. The documentary is dedicated to racers Francois Chevert, Roger Williamson, and Peter Revson, who lost their lives pursuing their dreams in a short life of fame and adrenaline during a time where the sport was seen at perhaps its most competitive and deadly. Focusing on motorcycle road racing, TT3D, Close to the Edge, is a 2011 documentary, though not being the first, that focused on the notorious fast and extremely dangerous Isle of Man tourist trophy race. Being ridden on a public road course, The race had officially begun in 1907 and is an event that many locals and others around the world come to see, scattered across the small country town which the riders pass through with incredible speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Taking place in the space of 2 weeks under different specifications of competition and practice, the race is known as much for its speed as it is for the many deaths that have occurred throughout the years due to the public road and rule setting. Given the high probability of death, the TT attracts only those willing to risk it all for what has been described as one of the ultimate adrenaline rushes in motorcycle racing. Showcasing the event that takes place on nearly 38 miles of public road, the story sheds light on this competition like no other documentary had done before, not shying away from the danger of the race as it explains, of the time of the documentary's release, 231 riders had died on the course up until that point. Although the prize money is not the greatest of rewards when compared to other sports, it is the prestige of winning, if only once in this yearly event with absolutely no margin for error allowed, that drives these men and women to put it all on the line, and with only one goal, to be the fastest rider on the day.
We are competing to win. And if you no longer go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver.
At number 1 is a fitting place for this unique documentary simply titled Senna, about one of, if not the greatest Formula 1 driver of all time as considered by many. This 2010 documentary places a tribute to a type of racer that few had ever seen before or since his untimely death during the San Marino Grand Prix on May 1st, 1994. A 3-time Formula 1 world champion, Ayrton Senna da Silva was one of the most aggressive and talented drivers of the sport that made his skill behind the wheel look effortless on the racetrack as he would drive almost flawlessly even under the most extreme weather conditions. Unlike the traditional talking heads or narration over footage documentary style, Senna plays as an almost linear movie as it uses a wide selection of archive footage to tell its story. Behind the scenes, press interviews and news coverage along with home videos are used well as it plays out during the runtime and help to showcase Senna's development as a racer and a number of the issues of the politics he had to deal with in the F1 Commission who he'd often clash heads with. It was in the legendary and arguably the greatest Formula 1 racing car ever built, the McLaren MP44, where Ayrton Senna won his first World Grand Prix title and almost gave a clean sweep victory for McLaren that season, along with then teammate Alain Prost. Powered by a Honda 1.5 litre V6 turbo engine with an output between 650 and 700 brake horsepower and a top speed of 333 km per hour, the MP44 is the car that changed history at the 1988 Grand Prix Championship, and its status as one of the best designed and engineered Formula 1 racing cars is thought to be well deserved. Though criticised for pulling some of its punches when it came to the full story of Ayrton's life, the documentary supports a deep profile look into the racer and boasts a wonderful soundtrack played throughout, drawing on the right emotions at the right moments, syncing perfectly with the chosen style. Winning a BAFTA for Best Documentary Film, Senna is a must-watch for all racing and car enthusiasts, and even those who may not be hardcore Formula 1 fans, and can also draw attention from those who may not be interested in racing at all due to its approach on focusing on the human aspect of motorsports, and would make for a great introduction into the motor racing world itself. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like, subscribe and bell icon in order to help this channel grow and to bring you more content like this one, as your support is what keeps this channel going.